Hello there, friends. This is Spencer Michaud, and today we're going to be talking about the new moon in Aquarius II. I am joined today by my good friend Gary Caton. How you doing, my friend?
Doing well, Spencer. Great to be here, man.
Yeah, it's great to see you. Gary and I have participated in a few different. Where were we at? Glock, right? We are at the
Yeah.
Glock Astrology conference a few years ago, and spent some time together and really got to know each other. And I'm so excited because you're such a talented and skilled astrologer. Really a fan of your work, my friend.
Thank you, man. So
Um,
likewise.
so you're joining us from North Carolina. Maybe tell us a
Yep.
little bit more about yourself and what brought you to astrology, and maybe some of the things you have on offer in the hopper coming up.
Right. Well, that's a little bit of a long story. I'm on my Saturn return as an astrologer this year, man.
Nice.
Can you believe that?
That's crazy.
I can barely believe it. It's like, what? But yeah, like in 1993, I had a dream where I saw the symbol for Venus inside the sun. And I was like, holy shit, that's got to mean something, you know? And I got an ephemeris, one of those old blue Rosicrucian ephemeris, and I looked it up. And his Sun and Venus were conjunct on the day that I had the dream. And I was like, wow, man. And so that's how I became an astrologer. And I've just been going at it full speed ever since. But yeah, I started out like as a modern astrologer, like most people did back then. And then I stumbled just through sheer dumb luck, literally stumbled onto Project Hindsight in Berkeley Springs, West Virginia. And so I got exposed to a lot of classical material. From there, I kind of went a couple different ways. I really got serious about understanding astronomy, and doing astrology with my face, like sky astrology. And then I got into hermetics, because I was really astounded to find out that, like, you know, the astrology was never really practiced in isolation back in the day. It was practiced as a tool to aid alchemy and magic and all that stuff. And so I would really classify myself as a hermeticist first, or as a hermetic practitioner, first these days. Um, so I do. I put out a monthly report. I just got finished with the monthly report. I'm a little late this month. 50 pages, man, of
Oh, wow.
magical elections,
Nice.
because there's so much going on this month. We've got a Venus Mars conjunction. You know, Jupiter's now in Pisces. We've got a lot of cool stuff going on, and I really wanted to like go through all that. And so, yeah, usually it's like 20 to 40 pages. I put out that every month, and it, you know, it gives people an opportunity to practice with these alignments, and to try to make their lives better, you know, through invoking the planetary powers and calling on their, you know, what planetary. I mean, actually, I do like 6 different kinds. We work with planetary magic, decans, and then of course fixed stars, constellations, lunar mansions. Let me see. I did say 6. I'm missing one there. Let's see, planetary, decans, fixed stars, constellations, mansions. There's something else in there that I'm missing. But anyway,
That's
so
that's that's
that's
that's a
it's a
good amount of
lot. Yeah.
stuff to draw from
It
right
keeps me
there.
busy, man.
Yeah,
And
sure.
then I actually make I fashion custom talismans, um that for special elections. Like not all of them are worthy of like, you know, what this etching it in stone,
Sure.
you know. So you might just do a petition or something, right, if it's not your best election. But with the ones that are really, I go ahead and make some permanent talismans, and those are available exclusively to my members. I don't sell them. In fact, I don't even sell them. They're available to my members basically on a donation basis, because it's like, if you're really hardcore about this stuff, some people believe that you're creating a being when you create these talismans, that you're ensouling a piece of matter with a starry, you know, spirit.
Yeah.
And it's like, it would be almost like trafficking in beings then, if you're so I'm selling the service of, you know, just calling this stuff down
Well,
rather than
I think
selling
I think that was one of the first
stuff.
experiences I had with you, Gary. Was sitting in on a paper talisman workshop that you did
Yeah, we
at the
did. I think it was Alfeca. Yeah, we
Alphecca.
did.
That's
Yeah,
right.
yeah, yeah.
So
Remember that? That was cool,
Jupiter. It
man.
was Jupiter on Alphecca. So that was
Yeah.
a lot of fun, and
Yes. Yeah.
very edifying and whatnot. So yeah, I really appreciate the work that you do, and especially appreciate the way that you bring in astronomy to the conversation. I think that was another thing I enjoyed that we participated in together was sitting out in a field, at dusk, seeing the stars move together, and you being able to point out all of the different movements that we were seeing and what constellations we were seeing.
It saved my life as an astrologer, man, because it's a tough gig. It's not easy, and there's a lot of yeah. I mean, it's tough to make a living, as a creative person, and there's a vitality. This, we call it the living sky,
Yeah.
and it's alive, and there's a vitality that comes from that I cannot even begin to describe you, but I know that it kept me from burning out, and that's the reason why I made it 29 years as an astrologer.
Well, and you're an
So,
excellent photographer too. You post your photographs on Facebook every once in a while, and they're all just amazing. So incredible photographs.
thank you, man. Yeah, I wanted to share that vitality with people, and it comes across evidently because, yeah, a lot of people are just like, oh my God, yeah.
Sometimes I wonder if you sleep. When do you get up and go take these photographs, man?
Sometimes I do not sleep,
Yeah,
but what I do is, I go and go and go, and then I take a couple days off and just crash out and
yeah,
chill and, whatever. Yeah. Yeah. But sometimes that's what it requires. It requires you. And that's what, I had to get really militant actually about my copyright with that stuff, because people think that images are just like, free because they're on the internet. And it's like, hey, man, I climbed a mountain in the cold, and like put myself in danger to get that shot, you know, and it's not just, you're not honoring my commitment, which is pretty freaking hardcore to get up at like 2 or 3 a.m., climb a freaking mountain in the dark. You know what I'm saying? In the
so when
cold.
are we going to see the Gary Caton photograph NFTs? Like,
Dude, that is something I'm really psyched about trying.
sure.
Yeah, yeah. I've been looking into blockchain quite a bit, and I've educated myself on it quite a bit, but I'm not quite there
Yeah.
with like being able to load anything onto NFTs or anything. But yeah, it's an interesting idea. I mean, you could technically, take an election and you could load any kind of image onto the blockchain, and if you do it at an elected time,
It's a
then
talisman.
it's a talisman,
Digital
man.
talisman. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's cool.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So in theory, soon, but
All right.
I don't have an exact
Well,
date.
keep your eyes out for
Yeah,
non-fungible token versions of Gary's photographs where you can support him and his work. So we can
right on, brother.
find your 40 to 50 page election work,
Dreamastrologer.com.
dreamastrologer.com, and you
That's my
have like kind of a
website. Yeah.
subscription service for that as well, right?
Yeah, that's right. So there's a membership thing. I just got together with my members last night. We spent about 2.5 hours talking about. I'm doing a class right now for them, which it's exclusively available to members, but it's an intro to hermetics class, and we were
Nice.
going over the first lesson, and yeah, it's a lot of fun. At some point, honestly, I'm probably gonna the membership has grown to such an extent that I'm probably gonna have to close myself off to the general public and only be able to serve my members, because especially if I'm ever going to get any writing done,
Sure.
it's just crazy, man. So,
Well,
but yeah,
I'm happy you're here with us and sharing your wisdom with
yeah,
us
yeah,
today
no,
because
absolutely.
I think a lot of people will benefit from your
I
perspective.
always enjoy spending time with you. So,
Yeah.
when you said let's get up, I remember we did like a video live at GLAC that one time, I think, and that was cool. That
That
was
was
a lot
true.
of
That
fun.
was my first foray into the interview format. So you and Ann Ortley and like some other folks at Glock with Achutabava and all those folks. That was me getting my feet wet with the
You did
with
good, man. I
images.
enjoyed it. Yeah, yeah, it
Now I've
was
got
fun.
this fancy microphone and everything. So it's been quite a journey.
Right
Okay,
on.
so visit Gary Caton at dreamastrologer.com. Sign up for his magical election membership program if there's spots available. If you want to support his photography work, make sure that you are respecting his copyright with that, and getting in touch with him specifically if you want to share one of those photographs, because it takes a lot of hard work. And just one last thing, are you still podcasting, or
Oh yeah, definitely. Hermetic
got the-
Astrology podcast
Yeah.
is it's basically bi-monthly. I started that in 2008 as the Goddess Astrology podcast, and then
Yeah.
I did 8 years of service to the goddess because Venus was my dream, and then I rebranded to Hermetic Astrology podcast, and I wrote a book on Mercury. So
that's the other thing I wanted to turn people on to. Tell us about your book, because that is a wonderful contribution to the astrological community.
Thank you, brother.
Do you have it with you?
Yeah, I've got one over here on the bookshelf. Let me grab it. I'll show people. This is one that I consecrated on a magical time, but it's Hermetica Triptycha. So that means there's 3 volumes. There's only one in existence. This is volume 1. The other 2 are still in my head. Some halfway between my head and print at this point. Well, the second one is, but this one is called the Mercury Elemental Year, and it's about the concept that Mercury spends more time in one element in any given calendar, and not necessarily calendar year, but most calendar years, Mercury will spend more time in one particular element than it will in all the other elements combined, because of the back and forth motion of retrogrades. And this is really profound. And so what that means is that, the year you were born, Mercury was spending more time in a particular element. And then each year, and so that comes out to like a 6 to 7 year cycle. So last year and this year, we have Mercury spending way more time in the air element. And what's interesting about that, like I did a blog for TMA, for the Mountain Astrologer, on this. Take a look at the year Bitcoin came out, 2009. That was a Mercury elemental year of air.
Right.
Then Ethereum came out 6-7 years later. And then last year we had the big NFT boom. So you can see these themes, these collective themes arise every 6 to 7 years when this element gets accentuated. And it's really profound. And then what happens is, so 6 to 7 years, it comes back to the same element. And then there are 12 of those returns over the course of a 79-year life cycle. And so each time that Mercury returns to the element of the year of your birth, it represents like an alchemical purification of your soul. Like it's a developmental cycle, in other words. Right. And so the thing that I'm most proud of is the last chapter is about that. It's about following these returns as a developmental cycle and as a sort of evolutionary growth of your soul. And yeah, it's really profound stuff.
Yeah, you're my go-to for all things Mercury/Hermes. So I've been hitting you up in the DMs on various places to be like, hey, what do you think about this? What's Hermes doing right here?
Right on. I'm happy to be the Mercury Man.
and that book is through Rubedo Press, is that correct?
Yes, sir. Yeah.
Which I'm a huge fan of. I want to make a huge shout out to Aaron Cheek, because I'm actually a huge Aaron Cheek fan. That guy.
Right on.
Yeah. That guy knows his stuff. So
not just that, but he makes a damn fine book. I mean,
they're beautiful. They're works of art.
It even feels good. It's like, God, I mean, even the what do you call it? It just feels good. What is the word? I can't think of the word anyway, but it feels good when you touch it. It looks good. Great cover. I mean, this is all the stuff that I can write a book, but I can never do any of this. And so, yeah, he does a fantastic job. He's got Demetra George's first volume out, and the second volume's coming. He's got a lot of other people on the esoteric.
He's really into
and
Hermeticism, right? He's kind of he has a doctorate, I believe.
Alchemy.
Yeah.
It's a pretty hardcore occult, esoteric press, really, more than astrology. But
I'm going to keep singing his praises because if I ever write a book, I hope that Aaron Cheek will release it for me.
I bet you Aaron hopes he's able to find some time to do it. He's an incredibly busy guy. But yeah, I appreciate that. Yeah.
So where's the best place to find that book that you
well, you
benefit
can get
the
it
most
from
from?
Rabito, and Rabito, he's in New Zealand, and so at first it was a little bit difficult. Shipping was a little bit prohibitive, but I'm pretty sure he can ship from the US now. So it's not necessarily, it is on Amazon. If people do Amazon, it is there. So you can get it there. I used to be able to get, but I only have 2 copies left, and they're both personal copies. So
Well,
I actually
I
need
have a
to get in
signed
touch
copy.
with.
I have a signed
Yeah,
copy.
there you
on my
go. Yeah,
bookshelf over
I
there,
try to
so.
keep some around so I can sign them for people. And every once in a while, when there's an interesting alignment, I'll go through and I'll consecrate like a limited series of books or whatever. But I need to get in touch with Aaron and say, send me some books, man.
Sure. Okay, so check out Gary's book. Check out his website, Dream Astrologer. Support the work that he's doing. And again, thank you for joining us here today.
Thanks
You're
for
one of
having
the I think one of the really interesting figures in our field, doing some work that is unique. So I really enjoy your perspective.
I am nothing if not unique, sir. I appreciate you recognize that.
Okay, so I am looking at the chat box here. We've got some wonderful people joining us here. We have Lisa coming from New York. Hannah is here, I believe, from Missouri, right? If I'm remembering that correctly, Hannah.
Nice.
Another wonderful astrologer. Susanna is joining us from Finland. Tabby Cat Benson, hello, from San Diego, California. Remco is here from the Netherlands. Lynn is here from Vermont. Fionn is here from Ireland. Dimfy from the Netherlands. And another Finland alumni, Tarja, is here as well. So I hope that like I said, we have an international crew that comes out for this, and it's a lot of fun. So thank you all for joining us
from
today.
the Netherlands, man.
Nice.
On my mother's side, yeah.
Nice. So the end of our little business thing here is that I also have something coming up in the hopper. I have my Decans of Aquarius webinar that's coming up on February the 12th, which is a Saturday at 1 p.m. I'm going to be doing a deep dive on connecting the tarot to the decans, as well as the fixed stars and the mythology. So if you're interested in the things that we're talking about today, you can get an even more in-depth look at some of that through the webinars that I'm doing. You can sign up. There's a link to sign up in the description of this video, or check out my website, spencermichaud.com. And I want to say, if you're enjoying the work that we're doing here today, there are a number of ways that you can support us. The first thing that you can do is we're just so happy that you're here with us, is hit that like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel. If you'd like to make a material donation to the show today, there's a little $sign in the chat box. That's called a super chat or a super sticker. We already had a nice donation from Lisa. Thank you so much, Lisa, for that today. Or you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com. And really what you're doing is buying people like me and Gary the gift of time to do this research that we're doing. And that is really a huge gift for the type of work that we do, because it allows us the headspace to be able to not have to worry too much about our material reality, so that we can go dive into these liminal spaces that we'll talk about today, and then hopefully deliver something of value to you. So you're supporting that work by doing that. So thank you so much, everyone who is supporting us here today. Okay, Gary, that's our business for the day.
Awesome.
Should we dive in? Thank you, Susanna, so much for the super chat. I appreciate that. Should we dive into the chart here? I'm going to pull up the chart. We're going to, Gary and I are going to go back and forth with sharing our screen here and share some various things. So what I'm going to do is I'm first going to pull up the chart of the new moon in Aquarius. Can you see that, Gary?
Yes, sir. Now that I got my glasses on.
All right, so we've got February 1st, 2022 at 12:46 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We have a new moon that's happening at 12 degrees of Aquarius in the second decan of Aquarius. Saturn is co-present, heading towards the cazimi of Saturn at 15 degrees a few days later. And we have a separating square of this lunation from Uranus.
Wow,
So
look at that. It's like partile conjunct the Emoc there almost, isn't it?
yeah, this is
in Ypsilanti?
in Ipsy it is. So we'll see what happens here in
It's too
Ipsy.
bad that the sun or the moon don't have any dignity there, because if they did, that would be a mad cazimi talisman.
Yep, we'll see.
Opportunity. Yeah.
Yeah, we'll see.
Well, that's pretty rare to have the exact new moon on an angle.
Yeah.
It's hard to
Yeah.
get,
Yeah,
actually.
you work with Aries ingress charts as well, right?
Right.
I've seen some really great articles that you've written about, uh, figuring out what the season is going to be like based on the ingress of a planet at one of the turnings, right? The either
Yeah.
the at the I believe the solstices and the equinoxes.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. You do the Aries ingress, and then if it's a fixed sign on the ascendant, that's it. That's all you have to do. So if
Okay.
this were one of these ingress charts, this chart would be good for the year.
Okay.
And then if it's a mutable sign, you do it again for Libra. If it's a cardinal sign, you do it for all four.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
So getting the little mundane tips and tricks, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because Mars was really active in that last chart that we had for last year's ingress, and that what it did have a fixed sign rising,
Yeah.
and it had Mars in the fourth, and Mars is often known as the end of the matter. And if you think about it, the end of the matter, because the first house is like the first thing that rises over the horizon, right? The eastern horizon. And then the 10th house, culmination, seventh house, the setting, and then the fourth house is the last of the four angles.
Right.
So it represents the end of the matter in that it's kind of like the final, thing. And so, yeah, and so now we see, there's some Mars activity going on in the socio-political arena. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense. We had a really active Mars in that chart. And Mars, we're going to be talking more about Mars here in a minute. So,
So, what do you think, Gary, is the best beginning resource for learning mundane astrology and about ingress charts in particular? Because I think that's something that I always like asking folks is what kind of books that they like to learn from these types of things.
The website wise, Deb Holdings' website, SkyScript.
Mm-hmm.
If you type in SkyScript ingress, she has a really good, like, just basic primer
Okay.
right there on her website.
Nice.
That's really good. And then I guess the definitive work on that was, Abu Massar. I think Ben Dykes did a translation of that.
Okay.
But
Is that the green one or the purple one? He has all these great colors. Is it in the Great Introduction, or I just have a number of these here on my shelf?
Yeah, I'm not remembering which one it is at the moment,
Okay.
man.
So Abu Mashar, Ben Dykes,
Abu Massar,
Mundane
Masha
Astrology.
Allah, those cats,
Okay.
that era of astrology with the
Mhm.
Persian era, which it went from, Greece or Hellenistic Egypt really over into Persia. And these cats, they came up with solar returns, they came up with ingress charts, they innovated,
Right.
and then they passed it back. And so, yeah, that's a wonderful kind of part of our tradition. Abu Massar also did a book on the Jupiter-Saturn conjunctions, which I don't think Ben has translated that one, which I
Well,
wish he would.
just give him a little bit of time. The guy's he's a machine. Like, I don't know how he does it.
Yeah, seriously, man.
He's one of the hardest working translators I think I've ever seen. So he pumps out a book every few months here.
Wow.
And that's a really great contribution that he's making to the astrological community as well. And I wanted to give a shout out here to Monica. Thank you, Monica, for the super chat. I really appreciate your support. Okay, so people in the kind of the Arabic tradition kind of were innovating, right, with some of the Aries ingresses charts. And we're talking about mundane astrology, seeing how as a collective we might experience something from a specific location. I wanted to point that out, that
Yes.
it is from a specific location. So you
Usually
can see
the capital city, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
So this chart is definitely something that we saw from my location of Ypsilanti, Michigan. But if we were looking at, like, for America in particular, maybe we would do Washington, D.C. potentially because it's the capital of the country. And then, like, for our international folks to check out what is going on in your country for the around the spring equinox, you would use your particular capital location for your country. Okay. So yeah, because I want to make sure that we don't talk too complex and make sure we're keeping some of this accessible. Like,
Yeah.
all right. So, Gary, What do you think? Some big picture thoughts about this particular new moon in general, and kind of all the things we see happening in this chart, and what we might expect moving forward.
Right. So, well, we have the Saturn Cazimi, which is coming up shortly after this new moon. So the new moon is well, it's in the middle decan of Aquarius, right? And it's in I guess it's in the bounds. It looks like it's in the bounds of Jupiter
Venus.
there.
I think it's Venus terms.
Venus terms. Okay. Um,
Oh well,
are you using the Egyptian?
yeah. So maybe on this chart it does look like Jupiter, but
It's just shy of Jupiter's bounds, actually. Yeah, yeah. It's like, yeah, last degree of Venus's bounds.
yep.
So when you have the bounds of a benefic, that definitely, so, the fact that it's there with Saturn, and Saturn has rulership in Aquarius, that's a little bit harsh, actually, right? Saturn can be kind of a, taskmaster and stuff. But when you are in the bounds of a benefic, it kind of softens that a little bit. And so that's nice that we've got the Venus bounds there. But that Saturn presence kind of, is unavoidable in the sense that there's, limits and boundaries, restrictions, cold, man. I mean, it's been really cold. I can't even imagine how cold it's been there in Michigan.
It's 8 degrees right now.
Yeah.
So single digits. It's very cold.
No, there's this really cold, isolating quality that comes with Aquarius. And I don't know if, people really don't think, you hear all of this new agey stuff about brotherhood and sisterhood and the age of Aquarius and stuff, but it's like when it's really cold and nasty out, it can be very isolating.
I feel, as I've started learning Aquarius, traditional perspectives, I don't necessarily think it's this happy sunshine, type of place. I think it's a difficult spot. And I think that there is opportunities for some very interesting changes that could take place, within Aquarius. But from my research with the decans and with the tarot, it seems to me like it's a place, number one, of leaving behind the past, of leaving, of saying, hey, it's time to move on. It's not necessarily, I think the New Age movement will focus on where are we going, the Jetsons, but I think that really the key is, it's like, well, what are you leaving behind? What is ending? Because Saturn, really has a lot to do with endings. Right. There's a book that I really like by Joy Usher called The Tiny Universe. I don't know if you're familiar with her work, but she's really great. This book is about the Thema Mundi. And she talks about Saturn in Aquarius and Aquarius in general as being an intellectual sign, but it's about the limits, not the physical limits, but the intellectual limits. And she compares it to a glass ceiling where we may have a certain narratives where we only let certain information in. Yes. And I've seen that as Saturn's going through Aquarius, we have these different echo chambers of information where there's only, you know what I'm saying? Where we're only allowing a certain amount in. Yeah. And no matter which end of a political spectrum it's on, it's like everyone has their narrative. Yeah. And I think that everyone's trying to figure out how do we control the narrative. And to me, that makes a lot of sense with Aquarius and Saturn.
Yeah, and then you have to remember, Saturn is the diurnal, Saturn is the trigon lord of Aquarius in the diurnal chart as well, right? So so daytime ruler as well.
Right.
Whereas Mercury rules the air triplicity by night. And the difference there is, like, think about, like, in the daytime, there's all of these assumptions that everybody shares that are that we don't even think about, and there's the, and that's the Saturn, there's a whole lot of cultural assumptions. There's a whole lot of legal assumptions that we had better be paying attention to, whereas at night, things are a little bit more free form, especially in your dreams, right? So you can see Mercury as the triplicity ruler of Aquarius at night shows you that mental rigidity that Saturn represents, that you were just talking about, of like echo chambers and pre-existing notions that, reality is so exceedingly weird.
That's
We
true.
cannot actually handle reality. So we have all of these structures, these mental structures, in order to keep reality at bay.
Right.
And that's what you're talking about. And I think that particularly pertains to Saturn as the daytime triplicity ruler, with the nighttime, with a nocturnal environment, and nocturnal environment, even in terms of, like you said, as creative people, if we can sequester ourselves away in our little, and not be subject to those, laws and rules and restrictions, we get a little more freedom. We get a little bit more of that Mercury, that nocturnal, because you can be in a nocturnal environment sequestered away without it being nighttime. See?
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So no, that's a really good point about Aquarius. Yeah. It's a very interesting part of it that I think a lot of people don't realize how much effort we expend keeping reality at bay.
Yeah, it's well, and it's difficult now because there's so much noise that we're constantly being inundated with, as we try to navigate these digital spaces. And when you have, basically everybody having a platform and a bullhorn, it can be overwhelming,
Yeah,
and it can be hard to navigate what is the consensus reality. Because I actually think, I was reading Charles Obert's book about the 7 classical planets, and I really like the way that he draws on some of the classical source texts to talk about how Saturn is both a boundary planet, but also it is the blueprint that is very much connected with Jupiter as the demiurge that is creating and begetting from those sort of like Platonic forms. Does that make sense?
Sure. Yeah. In the tree of life, or the stairway to heaven, whichever way you want to look at it, Saturn is the next sphere down from the fixed stars, and so
Right.
and it's only, it's the third sphere, right? You have the monad, and then the second sphere, the fixed stars, and then you have Saturn. And so Saturn is literally at that threshold of, it's in the supernal triangle is the technical term for. And so, yeah, it absolutely is a place of, creative energy, for sure. No
Right.
doubt about it.
And then one other thought that I wanted to bring into this is that my understanding of Saturn, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts on this, the difference between Saturn and Capricorn versus Aquarius being, a lot of the authors I've been reading talk about Saturn in Capricorn about being what is inside the boundary of Saturn, whereas Aquarius is what is outside and in
Yes.
exile or something of that nature.
Yes. The exile is a very, very key part of, because as you said, Aquarius is about moving on. So if you just look at it from point of view of of an agricultural calendar,
Mm-hmm.
The Capricorn season is post, it's the hangover season, right? You had the parties of Christmas parties and all that. And now it's like, shit, man, I got to get back on my diet. I got to get back to work. I got to get back, I got to get my shit together. And forgive the French, but I think SH is a pretty mild exclamation these days. And then, and then when we get to Aquarius, it's like, assuming we've got our SH back together somewhat, it's like, okay, now I remember what I was doing. Okay, I'm back in rhythm, but what else is there? Because last year, let's just say in agricultural terms, last year I planted, beans in this field, and I had the cow in that field, and blah, blah, blah. And like, what do I want to do what do I want to do differently? So it's about innovation. It's about possibilities, right? Because spring is coming.
Yeah.
But it's also, Capricorn is the walled city. It's what happens. It's the nocturnal domicile of Saturn. Right. Nocturnal domicile being, like I said, sequestered, closed away within the city walls. Aquarius is outside the city walls, and there was one of two. You were outside the city walls for one of two reasons. Either you were, an explorer or you were in exile, you know. Like either way, you know, it's not necessarily a comfortable place. I can tell you, as you know, the having experienced being homeless when I was in my 20s. Fortunately for me, it was when I was in my 20s, and I was a lot more equipped to handle it in a lot of ways. But that experience of exile is very profound, and I think it's something that, you know, when I hear people talking this new age kind of stuff about Aquarius, the first thing I think is like, yeah, let me see you spend a year homeless and then tell me all about, you know what I'm saying? Um,
Yeah,
but
yeah, I
yeah,
think
there's that quality of exile. There's that quality of dwelling on dwelling in the hinterlands, and that's where innovation comes from. You have to
sure.
get outside of what the known
Right.
into the hinterlands to innovate. You have to.
Well, it's kind of not being by not being a part of the consensus reality, you can see how the game is played and
Absolutely.
potentially be able to make adjustments up to the rules themselves. So, I mean,
Right.
I think that the other thing that we see with Saturn and Jupiter together is that there's, they are lawmakers, right? They are the agreements. And I think of laws, they're not just the physical government laws, but they're also just the laws that we agree upon as a shared reality, right? So you were talking about, being inside the castle walls with Saturn and Capricorn, and we're preparing through our rest period, right, for a return in the spring, and we ended a lot of things at the Capricorn turning, and now it's like a gestation, and I think that that's important to talk about the day that we see here is February 1st, which is associated with a cross holiday called Emoc. So tell us, we were talking about this earlier in the prep for this. Tell me a little bit more about Emoc and that cross holiday and what we should expect around that and what happened traditionally around that time.
Right. So that's traditionally it's like a Celtic fire festival. They have 8 of them, you know.
Mhm.
So um or sorry, I guess the 4 cross quarter were the fire festivals. And then, nowadays it's really more a part of the neo-pagan, wheel of the year kind of thing. But you know, the goddess that's associated with this traditionally is Bridget.
Right.
She's a goddess of sacred flame, and so there's this sense of like, oh, the days are getting longer. I can already see it where I'm at. Like it's getting dark a little later and light a little earlier.
Right.
It's still really cold, so it's not like it's making a huge difference. But I believe that word Imbolc or means in the belly, right? So
Mm-hmm.
there's this there's sort of this pregnant, the earth is pregnant with this new light that is um, potentially kind of be here, but it's not here yet, kind of thing. So there's this sort of pregnant waiting period where we're looking forward to spring. We can sense that it's coming even though it's not here yet, and
Yeah, I think it's still a point of evaluation, right? Where we don't necessarily have to make the moves yet. We just have to start conceptualizing them idealistically, right? And I love how you're talking about in the belly because in some of the Emoc research I was doing, they were talking about that word was related to the pregnant ewes that would give birth, like the sheep that would give birth at the spring. Um, and they actually, like in some celebrations, they considered it part of the beginning of spring, which was sort of confusing to me as far as like that and then the relationship to the solstice. But maybe they had a different way of conceptualizing time around that period. But
yeah, because they also saw Samhain as the beginning of the year,
right, right,
when Samhain being the cross quarter holiday in Scorpio, which is interesting because, um, that decan in the middle of Scorpio is ruled by the sun in the descending Chaldean order system anyways.
right.
And so it's and in the Golden Dawn system, all of the middle decans of the fixed signs are associated with the sixes of the respective suits. So the cardinal signs, you have the minor arcana associated with the cardinal signs are the 2, 3, and 4. And then the fixed signs are the 5, 6, and 7. Right. So that middle decan would be the 6. And the 6 in the Kabbalah is, and I'm using Kabbalah with a Q here, right? Kabbalah
the Hermetic
is originally a Jewish mystery, that's with a K, and then it became Christianized, Kabbalah with a C, and then it became Hermeticized, if that's even a word, by the Golden Dawn and whatnot, and they used a Q. And so they, Mathers, McGregor Mathers, who wrote, it's a volume called Book T. He associated these middle decans with the 6, and that in the Kabbalah, that is associated with the sphere of the sun, because the sun is, remember that TV show Third Rock from the Sun?
Yeah.
Well, the sun is the 6th sphere from the one.
Right.
Remember how we were talking about, you have the monad, and then you have the 2nd sphere is the fixed star, and then the 3rd sphere is Saturn, 4th sphere is Jupiter, 5th sphere is Mars, and then you have Tifereth, which is the sphere of the sun.
I'll pull that up. I actually do have a picture of this. So here, can you see that? Yeah. So there's our Kabbalistic tree of life that we're talking about here.
Yeah, and so there's a few things about that. You notice that the 6th sphere is in the middle column, so it's not on either of the extremes. And so it's about balance.
Right.
And it's balance between Chesed, which is Jupiter, mercy, and Geburah, which is Mars, severity.
Right.
And so, and now, I'm not Jewish, so I'm only speaking in terms of, what I've read. But my understanding is that, they literally saw it as the right and the left hand of God. That God is merciful and loving, and in fact protects you from your folly a lot of the time, and that's the Jupiter, that's the Chesed. And then every once in a while, God says, you know what? You're not listening. So, and rather than being cruel and punishing, God actually just steps back and says, you know what? I'm going to withhold my protection and let you experience the natural consequences of your own actions. So you're hurting yourself when it hurts, when the severity is not God punishing you, it's you running into the natural karma of your own actions.
Yeah, this is something that I came face to face with over the past few weeks. I got this book called Tarot and the Gates of Light by an author named Mark Horn. And it was doing the, are you familiar with counting the omer practice? So this is it was a Jewish practice, or a mystical Kabbalistic Jewish practice of comparing Sephira and being able to, it was mimicking the release of slavery of the Jewish people from Egypt. And in this book, he was using different tarot cards to compare the Sephira and that journey. And I'll tell you that balance between Geburah and Hesed that's a hefty lesson there, right?
It really is. I mean, if you've ever been a parent, I'm not even a parent, but I can definitely relate to it in terms of when I was a counselor. Yeah. I worked with children and young boys because they segregate the sexes for obvious reasons. I had a specific body language that I would use to tell the boys that, okay, now we're in which place we're in, right? When I would show up the weekend, I gave them the benefit of the doubt. I showed up in Chesed, man. Right. Love you guys. I'm here for you. I want to have fun. But you know what? If you're not taking care of your business, then I got to be this guy that starts doing this, reminding you of all the things that you're not doing. And it was really, I was motivating them by saying, hey, look, if you want me to be that guy that's fun and carefree and loving and have a good time, you got to take care of your business.
Balance, right? And temperance.
Yeah. And you're forcing me to withhold that fun stuff from you by not taking care of your business,
Right.
and so I was basically motivating them with my love, you
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
and it worked, man, and it was really an incredible thing to see and experience. And so yeah,
Well,
that's really what Tiferet, as I understand it, is about, is being a leader. You have to know when to motivate people with the carrot and when to motivate them with the stick.
sure.
It's like, and
Well,
and
it's
and
the
there's
heart. It's
there's
the heart too, right? It's the
yeah.
heart of the whole Kabbalistic tree of life. I mean, there's one quote that I was seeing here from Mark Horn when he was talking about Tiferet in the world of Yetzirah, which is the air suit, right? The suit of swords. And he's talking about the intellect reaching towards beauty, and I thought that was, wow, I thought that was really good.
That's
Actually,
why
that was
this
from T.
decan is
Susan
often
Chang.
associated
Yeah.
with like science
Right.
and especially mystical sciences and stuff. The reaching for beauty. Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's, in fact, that's the translation of Tiferet, isn't it? It's beauty.
Yeah. Beauty.
Uh,
It's kind of the central, it's the heart. It's compassion. I mean, I think that there's, I think that this particular decan being associated with Tiferet in a difficult sign like Aquarius is a bit of an oasis, actually. So I think that there may, this new moon, maybe it's a bit of an oasis within a difficult time where we may be trying to find balance between the old and the new, heaven and earth, like Austin Coppock would say, like the ideal versus the practical. The person that's in exile and the person that's in the center. And it's, since it's a Mercury ruled decan, right? So it is. This is where it gets tricky, because we've got the solar ruled Tiferet Sephira. We've got Mercury ruling the decan in the Chaldean system and the triplicity system, in both of those, right? And we've got in a Saturn ruled sign of the zodiac. So there's lots of different planets
yes.
that have an opinion about
Yes.
this.
Yeah.
But I really like the fact that, with Mercury being the ruler of this face or this decan, that there is this communication, right? Now I'll stop my share for a second. We've got this Six of Swords card here, where
Yeah.
we see someone being ferried across a shallow river. And remember, we have to think about this in context, Gary, right? Because we first had Five of Swords, Gabura, that you were talking about, right? Or we had some kind of conflict and maybe some sort of even intellectual defeat.
Winners and losers and all that stuff. Yeah.
And we're heading towards the Seven of Swords, the last decan of Aquarius, where we're finally leaving the known behind. And we're saying, all right, I guess it's time to go. The Saturnian clock is ringing. But here, it's that middle space where we're in the process of leaving that past behind, aren't we?
Yeah, and the ferryman is a classic mercurial figure, right?
Right.
A lot of people interpret that card because there's rough water on one side and smooth water on the other, leaving troubles behind.
Yeah.
Leaving, that decan is my rising.
Mm-hmm.
It's my horoscopos, and I have a lot of experience with those kind of moves. I moved several times. I took off out west and was wandering all over the place when I first, and that's how I came to my dream and everything. And then I've moved several times, for school and for personal reasons and whatnot, and that like that. So there's almost like a danger of the grass is always greener energy there, of like, if you just move, things are going to get better. And it's not necessarily true, because notice the swords are in the boat.
Yeah.
They're carrying their troubles with them, even as they leaving.
That's a good point.
You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, and the one interesting thing that I've learned about this card is through Robert Place.
Oh yeah, nice.
Alchemical Tarot.
Mm-hmm.
He has an image here, and you can see that the swords, rather than being in the boat, are in the sky, which is interesting. And
So
there's a
here's a comparison we've got here
yeah,
between
and
the
there's
Rider
a
Waite and the what is
yeah,
the alchemical tarot, the Robert
alchemical
Place.
yeah.
Okay.
And there's a divine breeze blowing in the you can see up here in the corner, there's a breeze, the persona, that's the anima mundi personified. The breeze is blowing the ship.
Hmm.
Now the ship is sailing in the same direction as the swords,
Okay.
right? So as long as the ship, as long as the steers person of the ship is accepting that loving, gentle breeze that the anima mundi is providing, those ships pose no danger. Those swords pose no danger. But as
Right.
soon as that person tries to tack against that wind,
Right. Yes. Yes.
and that's, I
Don't
mean,
paddle upstream right now, right? Go with the
you know,
current, right?
yeah. And I mean, that sounds like so simple and easy, but
It's hard to
my
do.
experience, it's
It's hard.
really hard to do
Yeah.
because it's hard to we're not trained to think of a loving guiding principle behind our lives. you
Right.
know it's not, we're trained to think of, the capitalism and the Protestant work ethic and all that. We're trained to think of like this harsh reality constantly imposing on us, but
Yeah.
and so, if you don't really have a conception of a loving, gentle breeze guiding you, how, you're going to perceive it potentially as this exterior heavy-handed force, and you're going to be like giving it the middle finger,
Right.
and it's really trying to help you, man.
Yeah.
That I got to tell you, it's one of the most difficult lessons, life lessons that I've ever encountered, is learning like when I'm actually fighting my own best interests,
Sure.
just because I've gotten so used to being obstinate.
Surrendering, right? Surrender.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
That's
surrendering to, because surrendering to a greater plan, a bigger plan. Like, it's not
right.
just about like, that's one thing that, is also a danger in magic, is like we get so caught up in like what we want, and we're using our will to create what we want. But what about what the gods want? What
Right.
about what the collective wants and needs? And there's bigger things at work than us, and sometimes we have to get out of the way and just let something move us. And
Sure.
that's, and that's a really difficult thing sometimes.
Well, that seems to be the greatest gift of Aquarius, right? Is maybe on some level getting out of our own ego's way to allow the winds of the divine to help move us to a new place that may be better than the one we had even envisioned, right?
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I found this so interesting as far as just the thinking of Aquarius as, even though it's a fixed sign, it's a transition point. It's the halfway point between what we were dealing with at the solstice and then at the upcoming equinox. It's like okay, let's check in. Where are we at? Where are we going between these turning points, right? And I think that, I think it's easy for us to get involved with saying we always have to be doing something. And I think that one of the things that I've learned over the course of my life is that I agree with you. The grass isn't always greener on the other side. And also that there is a time for gestation. If we bring it back to Emoc, right? There is a time for the pregnant possibilities, like if you were, I can't speak from personal experience here. I've never been pregnant with a baby, but I've been pregnant with a creative project.
Right,
And I know that
right.
there is a time where it's not ready to come out yet, and you're still taking in nutrients to feed what that is going to eventually become. And I really think that this new moon, it has a lot to do with that cycle of the process, that part of the process that we're going through here. Okay, and here I want your opinion on this. There's different authors that call this the river Styx or the river Lethe, Lethe. So we've got the river of death or the river of forgetfulness. There's a meditation for you.
Yeah.
What are we dealing with here? Maybe both.
Well, if you're a, if you're an Orphic they wanted to drink from the river of Mnemosyne, memory.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole thing, in the Orphic tradition, after, when you reach the afterlife, most people before they reincarnate, they drink from the river of forgetfulness, because but if you want to remember all you've learned and come back, like, think about this for a second. I always think that, like, there's no way in the world you could be an astrologer without probably having done something like that in a past life, because there's so much to learn. Like, how could you learn it all in one lifetime, man?
Yeah.
And
Totally.
so if you want to carry those gifts from the previous life forward, they would say, the password was, I am a child of earth and the starlit sky. So there's like this above and below, and that would get them passage to drink from the memory or drink from the river of Mnemosyne, of memory, So I'm going to be a true Aquarius and say neither of those options, man.
Okay.
It's the river of memory.
That's why I ask. And you bring up a great point, because let's say it is all of those rivers at the same time.
Exactly. That's what it is. Yeah.
If we drink from that river of forgetfulness, trying to release the old narrative, we may be doomed to repeat the same mistakes that we made before. So we can still leave behind the old life, the old narrative, the old time. But if we bring with us some of the knowledge that we learned from experience, maybe we can go on to a new journey, a new lesson, something, right? Because you see this here, he's bringing with him some of the swords as he leaves the past behind. He's bringing his wisdom with him. And this is what we're going to get to at that full moon, that we're going to see. The sun's going to be in Aquarius 3 here, where we're finally saying, hey, well, maybe it's time to go. And what did I learn? And what do I have to let go of? Remember, we talked about the narratives of Saturn and Aquarius. Which of those is your glass ceiling that isn't helping you to move on in your life? And which of the things are actually helpful that are helping you to learn from that old experience as well, right?
Yeah. I love it, man. That's awesome.
Yeah. And I love that you are, there was a great synchronicity involved in asking you to come on the show today, because you have the ascending sign right in this decan. So you've lived this liminal space. And I think that, observing your work over the years, you have a very unique perspective, and you're part of the astrological community, but you're also sort of on the fringe.
I don't belong to any particular
right?
school. Like, I'm not an evolutionary astrologer. I'm not what I call a classical astrologer, because I think traditional astrology is astrology with your face. Yeah, I don't belong to any of the. I've done a little bit of all of it, man, and I reserve the right to move on when I'm ready to. You know what I'm saying? I don't want to get trapped in saying, oh, I'm this or I'm that.
I love that phrase. That's something that Robert Hand said in his book Horoscopic Symbols, or Horoscope Symbols, back in 1981. Was I reserve the right to change my mind? And he did. And like, I love when people say that, because why would we get fixated on a part of ourselves that has a certain amount of wisdom available to us based on that experience?
That's what we got right now, but that's what it is. And if you're going to keep growing, then you've got to move on at some point. So yeah, exactly.
Gary. Okay, I'm taking a look at the chat here, Gary, just getting caught up here. We've got some good points. I'm going to read over some of these comments here. Nat's joining us from the UK. Amara's here from New Jersey. Thank you, Nat and Amara, for joining us today. We've got another Dubliner with Alicia here, Elish, coming as well. Darren is here from England. Hello, Darren. Rachel is also here from Ireland. Elish is saying, Eilish, I think that's how I say it. Ireland just made February 1st a public holiday from 2023. Now all 4 cross holidays are public holidays in Ireland. That's
awesome. Right on. Yeah.
Cool. Rachel saying Bridget is a really important figure in Ireland, and I believe Rachel is from Ireland as well. I love this time of year, still very dark, but something definitely happening. Yes, and we're going to see that in the I-Ching that I pulled is kind of like the first stirrings of something under the ground, but still kind of like it's still frozen, but you've got a little bit of energy starting to build, right? Rachel says the ancient Celtic calendar is very tuned into the seasons as they are felt and the energies they hold. Susanna is talking about the Handel Tarot deck, where the Bridget of Ireland portrays the Princess of Cups. That's interesting. I'm not familiar with that deck, but I love that there's all these different stories that are infused into these different decks. Okay. And then we've got a number. I can't read through all of them today. Thank you so much for participating in the chat, everyone. This is a very active chat. We've got a lot of great people in the audience today who are very intelligent folks with a lot of great things to add. But Remco does bring up a point. Remco from the Netherlands, about talking about mythology. How does Phobos, the daimon or spirit, come into the picture? And I think that's a great lead into talking about that part of this. So Gary, my understanding of Phobos is that it basically translates to fear, but specifically the panic, which I believe this is in Austin's book. He says the panic which sets men to rout in battle. So this panic, disorderly, undisciplined retreat after they freak out, that they're like, oh no, we're outnumbered. It's just this like, everybody running in a panic direction. But the key is the retreat part of it. It's not that they're like standing their ground, sort of like the Seven of Wands card. Sorry, they're like, oh, we're out of here. So what do you think about Phobos in mythology, and how that might play into our new moon experience?
Are you saying somebody has associated that with this particular decan?
Yeah, this was in 36 Heirs of the Zodiac and or the Cosmos of Jerusalem. They associated this decan with Phobos.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, being a Saturn ruled sign, I mean, anytime you're in Saturn's presence, there's going to be a certain amount of anxiety. I'm not sure where that's coming from exactly, so it's hard, but yeah, that just what you said, military, adventures are all based on discipline and order, and so, when your strategy breaks down, that discipline and order breaks down, bad things happen.
Yeah.
And so, if there's going to be a retreat, you have to retreat in an orderly manner so that you have a rear guard, and you can, and the part of the army that you want to get away is able to get away, and otherwise, it's just inviting disaster.
Sure.
And so that's what courage is, really. Courage is the ability to pause with that initial awakening of, oh shit, right? We're in a bad spot.
Yeah.
And your animal, your animal response is fight, flight, or freeze, right?
Right.
So the flight response has to be suspended temporarily in order to gather yourself, gather your wits, and gather your forces, so that you can, and it's when the panic takes over, and you're being ruled by just this animal flight, just wild, it in a one-on-one situation, sure, like if there's a panther charging from like a fucking run, man, or climb a tree or whatever, like sometimes you have, but in a military situation, that's not good, because basically you're just going to be running into each other and, inviting.
What I like about what you're bringing in there is that, it feels to me like the antidote to that feeling is actually the ruler of the sign, is Saturn.
Yeah.
And it's saying,
being able to hold,
slow down, chill out.
Yes.
Like relax.
It's good to recognize where things have gone wrong.
Right.
And it's good to recognize, like, maybe I need to get, ready to leave, but do it in a controlled and orderly fashion, rather than just, And the other thing you don't want to do is freeze.
Yeah.
So you want Saturn as in a delayed response, but you don't want Saturn as in a completely frozen response, because then you're just as much toast. It's,
Yeah, I'm thinking of just, there's an experience I'm having with my family right now where we're trying to move on from some old debt that we accrued, and there's the initial feeling is like just pay it off and be done with it and go, and like, oh, I hate this. But there is a strategic way where like doing it in a certain way could be more beneficial in the long run, right?
Yep.
Because you don't know if you need your money for resources that may be coming up. You have to be strategic and disciplined about it and have good communication, Mercury ruling the decan, to figure out how you want to move forward so that you don't actually end up creating a problem from trying to move on from what you're doing. So that popped into
Yeah.
my head because that really
Perfect
feels like
example.
what we're
Yeah.
doing here is
Yeah.
there's this old thing that needs to be released, but you have to have a plan. So I think it's like this is really decking like, hey, what's the plan? Like you got to make a plan, and it's okay to move on, but do it like you were talking about in a disciplined way rather than in this phobos panicked fear way that we may feel like we want to on some level with this, right?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. So I'm looking through my notes here. We're hitting a lot of the good points here. I was talking about the river, releasing old limiting narratives, balancing the heart and the mind with Tiferet and Yetzirah of air. I want to ask you about Saturn and its synodic cycle. I'm going to share the screen again, unless you want to have something that you'd like to share on your end. But I wanted to, and tell me at any point I can switch it over here. But I wanted to ask you about Saturn and its synodic cycle, and the potential also of Saturn being in its chariot and maybe being a little bit more immune potentially to some of the challenges of being under the beams right now. Do you have thoughts on that, Gary?
Right. So anytime that a planet is in one of its dignities, Schmidt taught that it's like a person who's in a covered chariot.
Right.
So they are somewhat immune from the burning rays of the sun, and they can, if you're in a covered chariot, as most of us are when we drive these days. I don't know too many people that drive around, and certainly not this time of year in convertibles. But so yeah, there's this idea that there's some amount of protection afforded to the planet where it's not consumed by the rays of the sun. And
Right.
so it reminds me of like, the planting as the Kazemi always to me represents like a seed moment, the seed moment of something where the, a concept, an idea, a small beginning, a seed form takes root. And so if planet is in its protected chariot, it's as if like it's a seed. It's, that in the Bible it talks about the seed can fall on, rocky ground, or it can fall on fertile ground. And so it reminds me of like a seed that's able to fall on fertile ground. Maybe it has a little bit of protection. It's in one of those, little peat pocket things that where
Sure.
has a little extra fertilizer or something that to get it going, like that. And yeah, it's interesting. The other thing that I looked at when you mentioned wanting to talk about that is I got out my Robert Blaschke was a great authority on synodic cycles, and he wrote a book. He wrote a series of books called Astrology, Language of Life, Volume 5, Holographic Transits.
Mm-hmm.
He goes through, and it's interesting. So basically, the way it works with Saturn is that it takes 29 Kazimis before it makes the conjunctions form a complete ring around the zodiac, right?
Right.
And then after 5 of these 29-year cycles, which comes out to 147 years, you'll find Saturn making a Kazemi within 1 degree of any given place.
Mm-hmm.
So essentially 147 from 2022 is 1875. In 1875, there was a Saturn Kazemi at 1644 Aquarius. And the one that's coming up is like in the last part of the 15.
Yeah, I'll move the chart
Right?
forward here so we can see.
So,
This will happen around the 4th of February here.
Yeah. In a mundane sense, it'd be interesting to look back at that. There was this was, of course, the post Civil War period, 1875. So there was a Civil Rights Act that was passed that year, which is interesting. so, you know, that idea, that is actually a little more consistent with the modern New Age conception of Aquarius, of like this brotherhood, you know, humanitarian kind of impulse.
Right.
That, and so, yeah, it seems like maybe that that protection of that, of being in the covered chariot, shows up a little bit, you know, in the historical record there, that there's some kind
So you were noticing that back in the late 1800s, which was a cycle that matched up with a similar Kazemi degree, that there was a Voting Rights Act that allowed more access to voting. Is that correct?
You know, I'd have to really, I wasn't able to look exactly what that, but yeah, it was a Civil Rights Act of 1875. Presumably there was some voting stuff in there. It was probably broader than that. I would hope it was broader than that.
Okay.
Because, you know, that was, you know, Jim Crow. There was a whole lot of things besides voting
Yeah.
that were problematic. So,
Yeah.
but just seeing that that's there is interesting, because it does actually vibe a little bit more with the modern conception of what Aquarius is about.
Yeah. I think that uh, I don't think we can completely dismiss some of the progressive thinking of Aquarius. I know Richard Tarnas was comparing Aquarius and Uranus and all of those things, which I don't think that Uranus is a planetary ruler of Aquarius, but there's definitely some sympathia, maybe potentially, between them. But
Right.
he was comparing it to Prometheus. And I
Right.
like the Prometheus story for that, because Prometheus was trying to steal fire from the gods. He was transitioning between one place and another, but also he suffered greatly for that gift, right?
Yes,
So it's kind of this ostracization that
right.
Prometheus went through to be able to advance, humanity. And I'm sure that around that period of time, there was a lot of people that were not happy about actually creating more equality. And there was probably a lot of difficulty and a lot of people that had to have the courage to speak up around that period of time. And it's really fascinating to me. And this is something that I talked a little bit on my monthly, but seeing this in context of what I think is one of the most important pieces of legislation in America right now, in maybe 150 years, is that voting rights protection, so that we may continue to have a democracy. And I thought it was fascinating. I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts on this too, but I see when Saturn makes its heliacal set, I've done some research on this, where some of the things start to break down in the agreements, the laws that we have. Like, so around the heliacal setting of Saturn, it actually was having a lot of difficulty. This particular law was sort of stalling in Congress and things like that. And I'm curious if we see a pickup or a revision of this at the Cazimi, and then maybe it being signed into law as Saturn makes its heliacal morning rise.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting, you know, when we go back to that idea of, you know, of Tifereth being a balance between Geburah and Chesed, you know,
Mhm.
and I know I'm not saying those right. I'm totally, you know, Latinizing them,
It's
and
all good.
so, sorry, but I feel
It's
like it would be
essence,
even
not
more
form, right?
awkward if I tried to say it the right way. It would
Yeah,
sound even worse
sure, sure.
because I don't actually speak like that. So I'm aware that I'm not saying it right anyways. But um, but yeah, the political parties kind of remind me of that, like of the extremes of each one wanting to own one of those extremes, of, like, you know, the Republicans wanting to be like, oh, everybody should take care of themselves and individual responsibility and blah blah blah, and you know, the Democrats being like, no, we really have to take care of everybody, even people who, you know, aren't citizens of our country, and blah blah blah, um and it's like, those, if those are two very extreme positions, and then finding some way to bring some kind of balance, where, yes, okay, you know, um we do have to take care of our people, and yet we also have to realize there's limits to exactly how much of that we can do. And if we're taking care of all kinds of people across the world that aren't even our citizens, then maybe we're not even really taking care of our citizens. You know what I'm saying? So I I really don't. I be honest with you, I've kind of checked out from politics a little bit because of that, because it seems like the dysfunction is so,
Sure.
the polarization is so extreme and the dysfunction is so obvious that I can't really comment on that particular thing. But all I can say is it would be very hopeful to see some kind of actual ability to do that process of governing, of finding some kind of middle ground and
Yeah.
making things, important things happen, you know?
Yeah, I agree. I think balance is important. I think that, I guess from my personal perspective, is that I try to, it is difficult to watch people battle and war. And that I do have I also have an inclination to want to check out. But I also realize that there's some people that don't have mm, they don't have the ability to do that because a lot of these things may affect them in a different way than they might affect me. So I try to at least be cognizant of that, and that that I have to pay some attention so that, you know, people are being treated fairly, and not get lost in my own world in that regard. Does that make sense? Because I think that
Sure.
it's easy sometimes to say, well, I don't want to get involved in politics if you know, the politics don't affect you. And I so that's my gentle pushback on that, I guess. Uh,
Yeah, there's privilege there, of course.
Privilege, right?
Absolutely.
Exactly.
You know,
So, but
um,
but with the astrology involved here, I think it's the last Saturn Cazimi that we had the heliacal setting of Saturn at on January 6th of 2021, when we saw the chaos, the breakdown of order, right, in America. We had the inauguration of the new administration at the Cazimi, and then we had something with, like, I believe there were new impeachment articles that were filed when Saturn made its heliacal rise. So the takeaway from all that, like, is that I think that big collective changes can happen at these Saturn, you know, renewals in the heart of the sun, and that are, you know, very idealistic sometimes too. And not everybody's going to agree on what those ideals are, but there might be, it may be the beginning of those discussions as far as, like, what is fair for the most amount of people, what is balanced as far as individual responsibility versus taking care of people in the collective, right? Because, you know, I'm with you. I'm someone who believes in temperance and balance, and I think that it's something where that's why we have the conversations sometimes, right? And that's why we keep it as a dialogue. But one of the things I've noticed, Gary, and this is why I like talking with you, you and I don't always agree on everything politically,
oh, and
but
let me be clear. I don't
yeah,
disagree about
yeah,
voting rights. I
okay.
support voting rights. You know, that's definitely not a problem for me.
But what I will say is
I'm
that
just saying in general, I'm kind
yeah,
of checked out from the whole thing
sure.
because it's like each side kind of misrepresents it from a polarized place, and you don't act, it feels like you don't ever actually hear anything remotely resembling honesty or
Well, and
truth.
that's what we were talking about with Saturn, trying to say, to limit the narrative and limit the information that people get. But that's what I was going to say, is that's why I like talking with you, is that there is an ability, I think, to have conversations like this that try to be objective and take multiple perspectives into account. And I think that we've lost that ability to talk to one another like this, and to be able to disagree, or not even really disagree, but just have slightly different perspectives on things, and still come away with it saying, you know what? I respect your humanity and I respect you as a person. And that's our starting point. That's our foundation. And I hope that's, I'm saying this because this isn't just about you and me, Gary. This is like, we're saying this for an audience where I hope that people can start to have these conversations again, rather than be in their Aquarian, I don't know, Saturnian echo chambers where they're limiting the perspectives that they would get, right?
Yeah, it's a little, it's obvious, honestly, it's a little bit, you know, even, you know, with all of the so-called, not so-called, but supposed privilege that comes with being a straight white male like myself. You know, at the same time, there's a feeling that there's a target on my back where if I don't say the exact pre-programmed language that goes along with whatever preconceived positions that some certain crowd has, that I'm automatically going to be labeled as the opposite of that, and an enemy and a bad person, and yeah, and on the cancel list and all this other stuff. And that may sound dramatic, but I can assure you it is not. So
Yeah,
yeah, it would
I
be
think it's a
nice for some
balance.
sanity to
And I think that,
re-enter the.
yeah, I think that, being in a similar position myself, straight white male who has definitely had privileges in some areas of life, there's an intersectionality around this where being privileged in one area of life does not necessarily mean that you are privileged in another area of life. And I think being able to hold some of the ambiguity around that is important. And also just treating, I think that the fundamental thing that you and I can agree on is that just respecting people's humanity. I mean, that's really like the Aquarius being the most humane sign, right? And while also not being afraid to say, well, maybe there's some institutional things that do need to change and that do need to be examined and looked at. I just think that some of those things might come up in the collective around this Kazemi moment. And I guess my hope is that people can have conversations with one another in humane ways that respects each other's sovereignty, while also not ignoring the pain that one facet of the society may not really understand too. I mean, that's the thing. Like, that's part of the thing. I have my partner is African American, and we have a lot of conversations about her experience versus mine and how they are very different. And there are certain things that she had to deal with growing up that I didn't even have to think about. Like, I didn't have the conversation with my father about being pulled over and how I'm supposed to act if I'm pulled over. And she did. Like, her and her brother would have something like that, like where she remembers very vividly, this is what you have to do, and to me, that's like an eye opener. Like, wow, this is a completely different experience in the same environment. Do you know what I'm saying? And
Yeah, not to mention that, as men, we walk around feeling safe most of the time, and women
exactly,
rarely do, you know.
exactly.
Yeah,
So
yeah, I get all that. And like I said, it would be amazing if what you're talking about were possible, if there was some.
we'll see. Human nature. I've been. I don't know if you saw this movie Don't Look Up recently. Have you heard about this? I don't know. This is this movie that's going around about like an asteroid hitting the Earth and what would happen if we had an extinction event that was coming. Could we agree on it? Like, even if it was something
Oh God.
staring us in the face. And the sad thing is that in that movie, spoilers, we couldn't. And and
Oh my
and I
God.
think that it's one of those things
Oh my
where
God.
I'm starting to feel that lately, where even if we have an event where we all have to kind of at least put some of our differences aside to figure it out, that at the end of the day, human nature is still going to maybe partition us in these slightly different thought forms and thought ways. But I don't know. The idealist in me is still like, maybe there's hope. Like, I don't know. I think it's a balance, right? I think it's like, as you get
Yeah, I
older,
mean,
sometimes we get crystallized, but hopefully we stay
yeah.
supple enough to.
No, I certainly wouldn't call myself an atheist politically. It's not that I don't believe it can work at all, ever. I think at one point it did, or it seemed to work a little bit better. But I would just see myself more as an agnostic at this point in time, that I don't belong to any one camp. I don't think there's actually a political party that represents my views. And so I don't belong to any political party for that reason. And I don't necessarily believe that political parties even really have my interests at heart, and so there's a sort of I think there's a healthy skepticism, that because there's a zealotry almost that's on both sides of the aisle, that's become commonplace, it seems like, where people are just like, um, so convinced that they know what's right for everybody. And it's like,
Sure.
wow, man, like, I don't think I've ever been that sure of anything.
Well, that's one of the things I appreciate about you, Gary, is that I think you and I both share this healthy, you know, skepticism that we just don't have it all figured out. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
and it's like I always say that when one question is answered, that brings up 10 more for exploration. And maybe this has to do with some of our more mercurial type of placements that we share. But I think that's how I approach it, is like, I'm going to ask some questions today and see if I can learn something. And that's tough in these times. Everybody has an opinion, and it's okay to have an opinion. I think that communication, though, is about both having an opinion and being able to listen. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
all right, Gary, let's move forward.
Yes, sir.
I'm seeing in the chat that Remco is asking me to sing the Ariana Grande song from Don't Look Up. But Remco, I'm going to spare everyone here and not attempt to sing an Ariana Grande song, mostly because I don't know the lyrics, or don't remember the lyrics. But that is funny. So thank you for poking me there. Okay, Gary, we've talked about Saturn. We've talked about the fact that we have this point of transition. We haven't quite unpacked the square to Uranus. Do you have any thoughts about what that could potentially mean for us?
That thing, one thing that I learned by watching the crypto markets that's really fascinating to me, the basic theory of astrological aspects is that they're more intense when they're applying and they're less intense when they're separating.
Mhm.
But what you saw recently with the crypto markets is that there was a big downturn after the Saturn Uranus square perfected.
Right.
And I've seen that other times too. I think it was back in the summer, there was a Sun Saturn opposition, and I was expecting things to get better after the opposition, and they only got worse. And it's like, it's a reminder that Saturn Uranus square is not really finished. It is, technically speaking, there won't be another one,
Yeah.
but it will be rephrenated this fall.
It's going to get close again, right?
It'll get very close again. And so it's really not finished. And that, it's interesting when you were talking about the three, the three realms in the tree of life, where you have the supernal triangle, and then you have the air realm, and then you have the water realm, and this idea of these patriarchal gods, Uranus and Saturn, who had this bloody war for dominance, and it was a bloody struggle, and there was and then same thing with Jupiter and Saturn, right? But then Mercury comes along, and Mercury deals himself into the pantheon, but without needing this bloody overthrow of his father. He's just like, hey, Pops, I just want to sit at the table. And as long as I can, I'm happy to serve, as long as I can be, by your side, I'm happy to serve. So there's that sort of bloody revolution, energy that comes along with the Saturn Uranus thing that is, that's part of my skepticism, I guess, of why, it feels like some of the things you were talking about is not necessarily possible, because there's these extremes of, like, the problem with Uranus was that he was repressive. He was literally like pushing the children back into Gaia's womb,
Yeah.
And so there's this repressive force, and then there's this liberative force that, oddly enough, in the myth, Saturn was this liberative force that came along and castrated the father and whatnot. And so, yeah, that feels like it's not really over. And I honestly, I don't know how much of a reprieve we're going to get from it. Now that seeing the way that things, the financial situation is very touch and go. When I was doing the forecast event for Astrology Hub earlier this year, Mike O'Brien, I don't know if you know Michael, but
He came on the show. He was talking about this.
Michael's really,
I'm glad you're bringing this up.
He said he saw some kind of similarity with the financial panic of 18 something or other, and I was like, whoa. And I looked at it and I was like, holy shit, he's right. I could see the parallel. And so that idea of the phobos that you were talking about, of
Right.
this panic, um, and the possibility for that, it, it feels like it's a little too close for comfort with that Saturn
Well,
Uranus
what he was
square.
saying, Gary, when he was here, he was here at the full moon eclipse, and he was talking about that the challenges that were beginning there would ripen when the sun was squaring the nodes. So
Uh,
here we have a full moon that is squaring the nodes
yeah,
here
interesting.
right
Yeah,
before. So the sun at the bends, right? He was like, that's when he thought that the markets would start to go haywire, and that we'd have this panic, like, which is fascinating to me. Um,
yeah,
I've been sort of starting to research, like some stock market things and crypto, and trying to understand it, just at least just from an observer's place.
right.
And it's crazy. I actually got involved in some of those meme stocks a little bit more as just like a fuck you to the hedge fund managers type of thing.
Okay, yeah,
I don't
yeah,
know if you're
yeah.
familiar with that, where there's
Right.
this short sailing like
Yes, yeah.
type of thing. You guys can research
GameStop
it.
and
GameStop
whatnot. Yeah.
stuff. Not a lot of money, but in I was fascinated by it because I was like, oh, okay, this is something that I can kind of like
Very Saturn Uranus, actually. It's like,
totally
you guys want to like, skew the game. Oh,
right,
well, we can come together and like, throw a
right,
monkey wrench in your little,
exactly.
plans.
But
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I've learned over just a week of trying to like follow along with this. Those markets fluctuate so much, and there's so much energy that's attached mentally to watching the little ticker go up and go
Yeah.
down.
It's incredible,
It's
man.
so addicting,
It's
and
very addicting.
yeah,
It's also when you have
and
skin in the
distracting.
game,
Yeah,
there's no like those primary emotions of greed and fear.
yeah, it's
When you
real.
have skin in the game, holy crap, man,
It's real.
it will show you what greed and fear are about if you get skin in the game and watch and pay attention.
Yeah, I don't like it. I don't like it at all. Like,
It's not for me either,
no, I don't
man.
like it.
No way.
And it's been a really interesting exercise over the last week, seeing what that does to you and becoming like the watcher and observing yourself
Yeah,
go through
yeah,
those swings of emotion.
yeah.
And
It's
and
intense.
I'll tell you another thing that this brought up to me in thinking about how this might play out on a global or national scale. It wasn't even really about the money for me at a certain point. I was like, you know what? I don't even, I have enough money to buy the books that I want to buy. It's not even about that for me. At some point, I was like, I just want to win. Do you know what
Right.
I'm saying? And like,
Yeah, absolutely.
and it doesn't even matter what the money is. I don't feel like losing. And that to me is a huge
Well, it's like
psychological
gambling.
epiphany.
That's
It's
how
exactly
gamblers.
gambling.
That's how
Yeah,
gamblers get in
exactly.
trouble.
Exactly.
They get. There's an addiction to.
Right.
There's a adrenaline high, and it's
Right.
about winning, and it's about
Dopamine. It's a dopamine hit,
yeah. It's a
right?
dopamine high. It's adrenaline high. It's a rush, and it's a mindset like you said about that they have to win, and the nature doesn't work that way,
Well,
man. You
because you think
can't.
about a guy like Jeff Bezos, right, that we like to hammer on for Amazon. He's got more money than he could ever know what to do with. But it's not about money anymore for people
Right.
like that. It's
That's
about
right.
winning. And like it's to me that was a huge light bulb. I was like, "Oh, we're in trouble," because that winning quality is something that is very deeply ingrained and takes an enormous amount of awareness to be able to transcend and to be able to get out of that cycle of winning and losing, and like the attachment and the addiction to the adrenaline and the dopamine. It's just been a very edifying process for me, just watching my own emotions, having a tiny amount of like fun money like in there, just to like, oh, here's a scratch off lottery ticket if this goes crazy. But I'm like, oh, I don't know, I don't even know if I like that, opening that door at all, because it puts you in a strange space. And I guess what my point being with that is, as we move forward into this potential period of volatility, how can you remain objective and not fall prey to that phobos, that panic, that fear of like going crazy when things start to shake up, right? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What would you recommend for people in that regard? What are some of the self-care things that you do?
Yeah, yeah. So, breathing, remember to breathe,
Yeah.
like time in nature, like in just values and priorities, like really, really like, and that's basically where I was coming from with the politics thing. Is not that I don't care about politics or care about the people that politics impacts,
Mm.
but it's like it's more like, you know, um, yeah, there's a certain amount of self-care that's necessary there for me, where it's the same as same energy that you were talking about with the financial markets, where if I get too plugged into all of that dialogue, it
Right.
becomes this like, oh, I want to win. And I think there's a lot of that same stuff going on with the politics, is they just want to win, they just want to be
Yep.
right, they
That's
just
right.
want to impose their view on everyone else,
Hmm.
you know and so that's really what I was talking about, Spencer, is that thing that you identified in the is just recognizing where something feels unhealthy, and being able to take a step back from it, and being able to take a breath and find those things that are, for me, it's nature.
Yeah.
If I nature is like nature is like my mother. She's these safe arms that I can go and be held and not have to worry about, is somebody, um, coming to get me or whatever. And so, um, yeah, like giving yourself a permission to take a time out and to take those rests and to be in that liminal place of from whatever it is, um, and not feeling like that that there's very few things in life that are actually make or break, do or die.
That's true.
you know
Yeah.
and from a Taoist point of view, the best thing to do in most situations is nothing. Non-ado. It's a Taoist state, right? Non-ado. Don't fuck
Right.
with it, because
Yeah.
you're only going to mess it up by messing. If you let it figure itself out, generally speaking, natural harmony will ensue by just letting things be.
Yeah.
And so I think it was Thoreau that said, a person is rich with regard to the amount of things that they can leave alone, they can afford to leave alone. So that's really where I was coming from when I made that comment about the politics, is like, for my own mental health, I'm in a place right now where I'm kind of letting that
Well,
alone.
here's the thing,
Um,
Gary. You know I love you, so I think that what the way that you're approaching things is not a bad thing. I think that it's important to center ourselves when we're getting involved in some of these things. Do you know what I'm saying?
yeah,
And
yeah,
I actually
absolutely.
agree with some pulling back. If too much emotional and mental involvement makes us feel destabilized, that can lead to adding to the negative energy of the conversation. Whereas if we withdraw and pull back into our center, then we're pulling out that negative energy, which itself is a more enlightened action. So I hear you, man. I
Yeah,
feel that as well. My only thing with that was just acknowledging that there are other
absolutely. I
ways of
get it.
dealing with it too.
Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
So Gary, okay, let's see where we're at here. So we've got this square between Saturn. I'm sorry, with Saturn and Uranus, the square between the lunation and Uranus. So potentially some instability, some shakeups. That decan is the Six of Pentacles, so maybe having to do with our routines and how we distribute resources and things of that. So this new moon might shake that up a little bit. Let me see, what else have I got here. I'm going to move forward here just and touch very briefly. And thank you for your time today, Gary. I really
You're
appreciate
welcome.
this talk.
Yeah.
And thank you for, I know we're going down some interesting avenues today, but you know, you're you're a gracious guest, my friend. Um, so we've got this square on February the 8th between the sun and the moon. We are also, just a little lead up to this, we had Mercury that was emerging from the beams on the 30th of January. Mercury stationing direct on February the 3rd at 24 degrees Capricorn. The Cazimi's on the 4th. And then we get this first quarter moon on the 8th, which also coincides with a Mars-Uranus trine. So potentially something very, some actions that could be potentially innovative. What do you think?
Yeah, that moon is interesting as the node has switched there into Taurus, um, from these, very mental and signs of Gemini and Sagittarius into more sensate and emotional signs of Taurus and Scorpio. Um, it makes me wonder if, like, um, yeah, that we won't see some kind of, anomaly with the weather or something,
Yeah.
that kind of, like a weather event or something like that. Um,
We've
but
got a
yeah,
bomb
that,
cyclone that might be coming to the East Coast,
oh
right?
man. I
Right.
mean, at this point in time, I think, it's funny because the lady that runs the Dream Group, or well, she's sort of just like the originator or founder of it. I'm sure she would disagree with me that she runs it, but the Dream Group that I attend, she's always like, um, she's a fan of winter, and she wants, because she's from Maine, and so she kind of makes fun of us Southerners, and she's like, you guys don't even know what winter is, and whatever. And I'm like, at this point in time, I'm over winter, and I'm like, yeah, but I just I get the feeling that winter is not done with us yet.
Sure.
Um, so there's that. Um, and yeah, I mean, the with the moon there, in the moon is in the Six of Pentacles, and she's the ruler of that decan.
That's right.
So
That's
there's a
right.
very financial energy there, and that's an opening square. So there is that kind of crisis of action that Rudyard called it.
Right.
And it's, yeah. So, there's Saturn, Uranus, there's the moon in her own decan. I would tend to think that the moon in her own decan would be positive.
Hmm.
And it's interesting because even at this stage, a lot of the crypto people are swearing that this bull run is not over, and that it's just, it's like taking a time out. And
Yeah.
um, at this point, I guess from the lows last July, this is technically still what you would call a higher low at this, well, as I looked at it this morning. So we could still get a rebound.
Hmm.
The moon being there in her decan, and with the north node, it's possible that there would be some good news on the financial horizon, perhaps.
Fingers crossed, I guess, huh? Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, so we've got that first quarter like crisis point where we're trying to bring something into action. Maybe this is the point where we're trying to really move on, but we've got to deal with some kind of material reality before we can make that crossing. We've got the Mars Uranus trine at this point where potentially, we've got Three of Pentacles energy interacting with Six of Pentacles energy. So building a new blueprint, but having to do it in potentially an unorthodox fashion with its contact with Uranus. Around this period of time as well, we've got the third conjunction of Mercury and Pluto at 27 degrees of Capricorn on the 11th of February. And then Jupiter makes its heliacal evening set on the 13th. So maybe there's something that we see in relationship to the Pisces area of our life too, that might be the beginning of a new cycle, the beginning of an ending that could lead to a new cycle when Jupiter makes its cazimi as well, right? Does that make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And you wanted to talk a little bit about Mars being out of bounds right now. Can you maybe help us with that a little bit here, Gary?
Yeah, yeah. Mars is, there's a couple things going on with Mars that's interesting. So the out of bounds thing, a lot of people ask me, what is out of bounds?
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I can do a screen share if you
Yeah,
want, where I can show some of the astronomy behind
let's
that. But
take a look at it.
there's basically, even before astrology as we know it, that is Hellenistic astrology, came about.
Yeah, you
Plato,
can share your screen now.
Plato in the Timaeus, Plato talked about the two great circles that he called the circle of the same and the circle of the other, referring to the celestial equator and the ecliptic.
Mhm.
The celestial equator is the belt line of the Earth projected out into space. In this diagram, it's this blue line. The celestial equator always goes through due west and due east. It's the belt line of the Earth projected out into space, and it's the circle upon which the Earth rotates once every 24 hours, right? And so he called it the circle of the same because all of the stars and planets rise, set, and culminate once per day. They all have the same speed in what we call primary or diurnal motion. The circle of the ecliptic, which is the pink line here, intersects this equator in two places at the equinoxes, right? So here's the fall equinox point of Libra, and then here is the winter solstice point, which by definition is the place where the ecliptic is as far from the equator as possible.
Mm-hmm.
That's what the winter solstice is. It's when the sun reaches the furthest south from the equator. Okay, now if we zoom in here a little bit, we can see that Mars is actually below this pink line of the ecliptic. That's what and so is the moon here, right? Whereas, see how Venus is way up above? Venus is in a northern loop right now, and Mercury is above the pink line.
Right.
That would be called north latitude.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Mars, and now, when you have a planet that's already near this place where the ecliptic reaches its furthest distance from the equator, and it's also in south latitude, then it's going to be farther from the equator than the sun ever gets. And the sun is a symbol of the king or queen or sovereign. So when you're in an area that the king never traverses, you're either some kind of outlaw, or you're like this emissary of the king who's going into this special realm, like Lewis and Clark were sent westward by Thomas Jefferson to explore the Louisiana Purchase, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Or you're Robin Hood, robbing from the rich and giving to the poor or something like that, But there's this rogue outsider energy because the planet is literally outside of the realm that's traversed by the sun. And so Mars, from roughly January 13th through February 10th, Mars, because it has this additional latitude south from the ecliptic, and it's in this place of the furthest south, Mars is out of bounds. So so Mars is already a planet that we associate with aggressiveness and hot-headedness and so forth. And then when you throw in this maverick, outsider, out of bounds kind of energy, well, you can see right there where that might be going.
I wonder if
What's
that's
interesting.
Oh, go ahead.
What's interesting though is that Mars is moving. See Venus here. Mars is moving into a conjunction with Venus.
Mm-hmm.
And what's interesting is that Mars is actually, watch how this works. Mars is actually going to pass Venus. That doesn't happen very often because Venus is faster than Mars typically, but
Right.
Venus is stationary at this point. So see how Mars is passing Venus there?
Yeah.
This only happens about every 6 to 7 years. There's 3 conjunctions of Venus and Mars within 9 months. And then the middle conjunction is the one where Mars passes Venus, and Venus is either retrograde motion or she's stationary. And Ruperti called this the most important conjunction between this pair. Like, this is the one that you want to pay attention to because this is sort of like the new moon or the reset of the cycle, of the synodic cycle between Venus and Mars. It's not a synodic cycle, but the Venus-Mars cycle is kind of like, this is the focal point going forward. And so generally speaking, since Venus is north here and Mars is south, Mars, think of it like, it's like, I don't know if you ever, did anything where you were like, you were boosting somebody up over a wall or like, whatever. If you're on the bottom, you're generally in a supportive role, and the person that is up higher is in, you're being in service to them. So Mars is somewhat in service to Venus here, and that might have an effect of cooling out some of that. So he might just be like doing this outsider stuff in a way that is actually trying to get Venus, whatever she needs. So he's not doing it necessarily just to be an asshole.
Sure, sure.
Yeah.
Do you feel like
That's a
some of
really
this?
interesting
Do you feel like
conjunction.
feel like some of these Mars out of bounds transits may coincide with some of the, I guess you could call it like the saber rattling that we see between like
Oh yeah,
Russia and Ukraine right
absolutely.
now?
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. That's part of what's going on. Putin
Yeah.
is, he's pushing the envelope because, and here's the thing. I mean, if you wanna like imagine for a second that we could take the advice that you gave earlier about, listening to someone with a different point of view politically. Imagine that we could take the time to actually listen to what Putin is saying.
Yeah. Where are you going with that?
Well, what Putin is saying is that, you have to understand Russia was once a superpower.
Right.
They had, NATO was they had their own version of NATO, which was the Warsaw Pact. There was a whole group of nations that were all aligned with Russia, with the USSR rather. And then slowly NATO started picking those off one by one and like taking away their friends, essentially. And now Russia feels like they're kind of surrounded, and they're basically saying, hey, quit trying to convert our neighbors to be NATO nations so that you can move troops closer to our borders, because that feels aggressive. We don't like it, and we're not going to respond favorably to it. Now, you could say right, wrong, or indifferent, but that's essentially what he's saying. And what the US is saying is, sorry, not sorry, we're going to do it even if you don't like it. And so it's like, okay, if somebody tells you that there's something that they don't like that you're doing, and you do it anyways, is it really any surprise when you get the results that we see, which is that there's pushback?
Yeah, I don't know enough about the geopolitical history of the USSR and their relationship with NATO or Europe to have a super informed opinion on all that. I guess
I'm
what I
not
was,
saying I'm super
yeah.
informed. I'm just saying I'm trying to hear what the guy's saying. And it's not a surprise to me
I
that
mean,
he's having an adverse reaction.
I do think it is important to understand where people are coming from in the midst of a conflict. I think you're absolutely right with that.
Yeah,
And seeing what is his actual beef, right?
right.
Because then maybe there's a diplomatic solution that can be worked towards with that. Now, what I will say, I guess, just for my European friends out there, is that I do hope that whatever happens over there is resolved peacefully, because I know that whole situation could throw that area of the world into chaos. And I have a lot of friends over there, and I guess my hope is that whatever happens, that hopefully Mars will come back into alignment with the Solar King.
Fortunately, it's not that far out of bounds this time around, and it's not out of bounds for that long.
Okay.
So
maybe this will blow over, you think?
And the other thing is, as I said, Mars was active in the previous ingress chart for last March.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think this will blow over ultimately. This seems to me very similar to what Putin was doing in Crimea. Was it Crimea a few years ago that he did a similar thing?
Yeah.
Where he's like pushing back against what he sees as an encroachment. The other thing that's important to understand about that is that, they see they see Ukraine as being more like Russia than Europe. Mm-hmm. They see Ukraine as being ethnically more similar to them. And, so there's that angle of it too. Now, whether or not they actually see it that way, or they're just using that as a, whatever, I don't know. But yeah,
I don't know if we're going to solve world peace. This conversation. It's so complicated, isn't it?
Yeah,
it's so complicated.
No, it's not a surprise that you see this saber rattling going on from an astrological point of view, or from a socio-political point of view.
Yep. I hear you.
It's not surprising, and like you said.
I think my main thing with that was just seeing that we could relate some of the astrological
Yeah, and
timing to that
the fact that
circumstance.
Mars is there with Venus, I think, is help because Venus is the planet of peace and diplomacy
Right.
and common ground, and Venus is above Mars, and so Mars is really having to, and now,
Surrender to it,
yeah,
maybe potentially.
and now, whether or not, that bodes well for Biden because, at this point in time, Biden is between a rock and a hard place. If he, you know, helps a peaceful solution, some people are going to say he was soft, and that's not good. And so you can't please everybody, no matter what outcome. But obviously, most
I think
people,
that's true. there
yeah,
will be there will
there will always
definitely
be people
be
that say,
competing interests for sure.
but
Yeah,
yeah, I'm
this is
sure
a
most people are hoping for a peaceful outcome. And I think that Venus's presence there is definitely cause for and both of those planets are dignified there.
mhm,
Mars is in its own decan and its own exaltation. I don't need to share this anymore.
sure.
I just wanted to show the astronomy part of that. But Mars being in its own, generally speaking, malefics when they're dignified are not as malefic. It's undignified malefics that you really have to worry about, generally speaking. And Venus has triplicity dignity there. So, but the thing that I'm excited about that conjunction is that there's a, psychologically and or magically, there's a opportunity for an alchemical marriage of the yin and yang,
Right.
the masculine and the feminine, the sacred marriage, alchemical marriage that we can achieve in ourselves, and generally speaking, these conjunctions that occur every 6 to 7 years, it seems like they kind of drive um, the the scene in terms of like what's popular in terms of arts. And like the last one that happened this was in Leo.
Mhm.
um, and you can see like over the past, like this whole influencer culture of like, you know being like the influencers are sort of like junior movie stars or something. They're like these Leo figures where they're like this, they look at me and I and I'm doing selfies and blah, blah, blah. It just reminds me of like a really Leo energy. Whereas, with this cycle being reset in Capricorn, it seems like more of a, like an OG kind of energy of like, I've paid my dues. I know what the heck I'm talking about. I'm not just this pretty face in yoga pants, that you should buy whatever I'm saying because I look good, kind of thing.
Well, I'm looking at the full moon here because what we see at the full moon, just a preview of what you're talking about here, is we've got Venus and Mars coming together at 16 degrees of Capricorn,
Yeah.
pretty much almost the exact day of the full moon. And I guess one of my final things I want to ask you about with that, I have initial thoughts about the full moon just being about, should I stay or should I go? With that third decan of Leo being about defending your territory, and the third decan of Aquarius being like, okay, it's just time to move on. You know what I mean? Maybe it's the courage to move on potentially. But we're going to discuss that. Me and another astrology, Dulcie Cardinal, are going to discuss that on February the 9th, which is a Wednesday. So please, everyone, join me for that. But I wanted to ask you, what do you think about the fixed star Vega here, where they're coming together?
Yeah. Vega is a star. Agrippa says that Vega is of the nature of Venus,
Okay.
so, and really Agrippa is just mouthing the book of Hermes, which was, Hermes Trismegistus. Um, and so I think that that's one more reason to think, Vega is the star of Lyra. Lyra is you often see, it's the harp, the
Right.
music. So musicians, like I think Stevie Nicks has this star. A lot of comedians have this star Vega. It's like for performers. It
Mm-hmm.
gives it's like it gives a performative kind of vibe, but it's artistic, so it's Venusian. So that's another reason to think that there's this sort of Venusian vibe that's going to balance the Mars out there. But that moon is in a nakshatra known as Ashlesha. It's in the head of the Hydra.
Okay.
So there was the last Venus-Mars conjunction, I think, was in the place where that moon is, if I'm remembering correctly. It was in Ashlesha. So there's this kind of intense Kundalini type energy that goes along with that. That's potentially very interesting. From a personal point of view, that might be the moving on might be, it's interesting because Jung said that we typically don't really solve our problems, we outgrow them.
Yeah, interesting.
The solution is just what you said, moving on, in the sense like if we grow to a certain degree, it's not that it's not a problem anymore. It's just that it's not as important a problem from the growth place where we, and so like,
Well, bringing the
this
Hydra
full
in,
moon,
maybe shedding some of that serpent skin, right?
or realizing like, hey, you know what? I'm bigger than this.
Yeah.
Like, I'm actually farther along where this thing that I've gotten used to identifying as a problem, I can now choose whether or not to actually let it be a problem or not, because maybe I've outgrown it a little bit. Something like that.
Yeah. Yes. Right. So use your charisma like Orpheus and his lyre, right?
There you go. Yeah.
To be able to soothe the savage beast,
Right?
Hydra,
your own savage beast,
right? Or Cerberus, right? Or the sirens that are calling you. Like, put people to sleep if you can. Hopefully, hopefully I don't put people to sleep on my show here. But maybe people do need some sleep in the winter, right?
Yeah. I've actually had people tell me they listen to my podcast while they're going to sleep, and at first I thought, wow, is that a compliment?
I think that I think sometimes it is, because if people are so relaxed listening to us that they could drift off into a liminal space, then maybe there's something soothing.
Or it helps them get into that liminal place. Sure. There's actually a whole like occult practice with that's called hypnagogia, where you mine that pre-sleep place for like images, and it's almost like shamanic journeying, where you're like seeing what comes up for you during that place. But yeah, that's a really good point. Like there's this hypnotic energy associated with Orpheus, and it would be advantageous to like against that Phobos energy that we were talking about, right? If you can chill that out, and or the aggressive energy of Mars, and or this maybe potentially aggressive energy of this Ashlesha serpent energy, if you can sort of chill all those out enough to where you can maintain some objectivity, and you might see creative opportunities of things that you thought were problems, where it's like, yeah, you know what, that's actually not so much of a problem anymore, and because I'm not focused on it as a problem, I can now see this opportunity that I wouldn't have seen if I was focusing on this thing that I thought was a problem.
I love that. So rising above it, seeing something from that transcendent 30,000-foot viewpoint, maybe the problem becomes insignificant. It's not worth worrying about,
or not as significant anyways. Yeah, exactly.
I like that, and maybe that helps us move forward, like this Seven of Swords card that we have here potentially. Okay, moving forward. We're getting some nice comments in the chat here, Gary. We've got a really nice audience here today. They're being very complimentary of both your wisdom, the combination of our chemistry together. So we've got a lot of people that are excited. Hopefully our voices are putting anyone to sleep today.
They're not asleep just yet anyway. Or maybe they're in that hypnagogia state.
Or if you need a nap, it's okay. If you need a nap, you can listen to it later and drift off into
This is right about my nap time, actually, now that you mention it.
Well, we'll wrap it up then, Gary. So I know that you and I could talk all day. So I that's why I love chatting with you, because I love when people are so passionate about myth, about this art, and you are a true artist, my friend. So I
thank you, man. Yeah, I feel the same way. Yeah, I always love talking to you. We always have a good time.
So to wrap up and put a bow on this little thing here, we've got an animal symbol that we can help us through this new moon. And we have an I-Ching that may be able to give us some guidance. So the animal symbol that I pulled for this new moon was the mouse. So Gary, do you have some thoughts on mouse energy?
My go-to for the animal stuff is it's
Yeah,
this book called Medicine Cards by
great
Jamie
book.
Sams.
Yeah, I love it.
Really,
Love it.
this is like one of the first esoteric tools I ever got when I
Me
was in
too.
college, and I
It was my
freaking love
first
it,
deck.
man.
That was my first tarot deck.
Yeah, same here.
Yep.
Yeah. And she talks about mouse as being like the ability to scrutinize things, to like really get down, like if you from a mouse eye point of view, right? To
Yeah.
really see things up close, like put your spectacles on and really examine like what exactly is going on here. Um, and I think that's very interesting. The other problem is like, you know, you can go too far with that where you're like getting, you know, so caught up in the details that you can't see the forest for the trees
That's
kind
true.
of thing. So,
So,
um,
which is interesting about pulling the mouse in Aquarius time because
yeah,
Aquarius is so big
like
picture,
big
right?
picture. Yeah.
Right.
Like don't forget there's the details. The
S-
devil is in the details,
So
as they say.
balance out your big picture thinking with your details. You know, a few things I was thinking about with this is they actually keep their burrows really clean. They have a specific toilet area and a specific place for their food, and they're very separate. So if you have some things that may be holding you back, like clutter in your environment or your space, clear it out to clear the decks for the new start, for the return of that spring energy that we're gearing up for at this cross holiday. They're also very fertile, though, so small actions can lead to big things. So I think that that's something to consider with mouse as well.
Mm,
Scrutinize, attention to detail, like Gary was saying. Examine both the big picture and the necessary steps to carry it out. Keep your environment clean and get rid of the old junk, even if the old junk is old thoughts, old narratives that are limiting you. And that will bring us to the I Ching that we have, which is number 24, which is called return, renewal, turning back. These are a couple other words for it: repentance, reform, restoration, rejuvenation, the turning point. So the I Ching that I like is called The Laws of Change by Jack M. Balkin, which is my favorite translation. He's a Yale professor. Do you have this book? It's a great one.
oh,
So he says, return, success, going out and coming in without harm. Friends come, no blame. Turning around and returning to the way. On the seventh day, return comes. It is beneficial to have somewhere to go. So he's talking about, in his analysis of this hexagram, the days becoming longer after the winter solstice, which fits perfectly with Emoc
yeah.
and this Groundhog Day type of experience. And that it's important not to force matters, that things are still in the early stages, letting them develop naturally with that pregnancy that we were talking about. Taking time to, this was important to me because we're coming off of Venus retrograde where I don't know about you, but I've had a lot of friends who have gone through some really challenging times with like partnerships and stuff.
Yeah.
So taking time to restore trust during a reconciliation after an estrangement. So if you had like a deep, like almost plutonic experience with Venus and Pluto in this retrograde, you can't like just make up and it's over. You have to kind of build your relationship back one stage at a time after you've identified the problem, right? Um, and yeah,
Yeah.
but the main thing what I saw with this was the ending of a cycle of decay, where we're getting ready for a new start.
It's
Um,
like one solid line at the bottom of below all yen lines, right?
yeah,
So it's like that line, it's like the first solid line amongst, so it's like this very first beginning of something.
the
That's what I
thunder
see when I
that's
look.
under the
Yeah,
earth, the yang that
right.
is almost wants to push up. Do you have a translation of the I Ching that you like?
Not necessarily, you know, it's funny. You know what I used to love? There was when I was in Norfolk, I completed my bachelor's degree there at Old Dominion, and when I was in Norfolk, I used to hang out at the ARE at the Edgar Casey headquarters there, and they on their website they had a version of the I Ching that was where they had like the I Ching text, and then they had various excerpts from the Edgar Casey readings that
Nice.
went along with it.
That's
And
cool.
for some reason, like they really spoke to me, man. And I used to
Sure.
use that one. It's like it was like an online thing. And so that's the last one that I remember really being attached to.
Yeah.
But yeah, the idea of this, you know, early stages of something build, you know, that's just it's in fact it's not even building yet. It's just starting to be present.
Right. Right.
It does feel like almost like perfect for what you like you said for Imbolc, you know,
Yeah.
like there's this, you know, pregnant seed of something under the earth that we can feel, but it's not ready to yet to bring out into the world yet. And we can just kind of hang out with it and let it grow within us and let it begin to build.
So patience is the key, huh? At this winter time,
Yeah,
it's
yeah,
important to
there you
rest,
go.
right? But also to examine and get that big picture thought. Man, we've covered a lot of ground today, Gary.
Yes, we have.
We cover a lot of ground, my friend. This is
No
so much.
doubt.
This is so much fun, my friend. Thank you
Yeah.
so much for joining me today and
Yeah, thanks for having me.
for
It's
sharing your
been too
time.
long. We should do it again before too long. I'll have you on my show or, you know, something. Yeah.
I'd be happy to join you, my friend. Happy to.
Cool. Right on.
So, thank you all of you for being here today. We've got so much great comments in the chat box here.
Really cool that we've got people from all over the world, like, you know, yeah.
Yeah, we had
Very,
we had
very
a
interesting.
number of people joining us live, Gary. We had I think over 40 people that were joining us in the live stream too. So, and many more that will be listening later. So thank you for that. If you want to support the work that we're doing here, the first thing that you can do is just thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to share it with us. I know there's a lot of competing things for your attention, but the easiest thing you can do to support the work we're doing here is hit the like button. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel if you're not. Visit Gary at dreamastrologer.com. He has a number of services that we went over at length in the beginning of the show. Support him. Do you do readings as well, Gary?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay, so Gary does readings as well. So dreamastrologer.com. Check it out. If you want to make a material donation to the show, you can hit that little $ and do a super chat or a super sticker, or you can support me at buymeacoffee.com. And remember, the Decans of Aquarius is coming up on the 12th of February, Saturday, 1 p.m. Eastern. I'm running a special until February 1st with the coupon code Aquarius20 if you want 20% off the price until then. So that's what I've got today. Thank you so much, Gary, again for joining me. This is so
Thank
cool.
you, my friend.
And I
Great
want to
to be
just
here.
zoom in on all of your books in the background that you have there. Like see what's on your bookshelf and
I got
we'll
stuff I've been gathering for 30 years, man.
yeah, well, I can't wait till the next time we can get together and just, share some space and look at the sky together in person. So thank
Oh,
you for being
man.
with me
From your
today.
mouth to the God's ears. May it be soon.
Yeah.
Amen,
And
brother.
thank you all. And remember, be kind to one another throughout these cycles and be kind to yourself and have a great new moon cycle. And I will see you the next time, everyone. Take care.
Bulk blessings. Bye-bye.